Stop apologizing. Do not apologize because you have your child on your lap, because your child is cranky, or because you need to interrupt for a moment. This is the new reality. This is not the working mother leaves her house to go and be
That's
a
right.
working person and you don't know what happens back there. This is realities collapse together, and I am in your bedroom basically. I mean, we've never been physically more apart, but intimately more connected.
Esther Perel, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You are clearly this expert psychotherapist. You have talked to tens of thousands of people and couples over the course of your career. But I'm curious, not just what you've observed about what couples and especially mothers go through when they become moms. I'm curious for you personally. Was there something surprising? Was there something particularly transformative when you became a mother?
So just to date myself, I have two sons. One is about to be 28 and one is 25. So you're asking questions that a question that is very interesting, because on the one hand it will bring me back directly to things that I may have never forgotten because they were so powerful at the time, um, and and then there are things that I would say I transform still as a mother. I don't think that it just starts because you are in the transition into motherhood. Motherhood is a continuous adaptation for the sheer reason that the mother of a 28-year-old is not the same as the mother of a 2-year-old. So it's actually a wonderful unfolding story. It doesn't end. What I did remember very powerfully was that I wanted, like many of us, I wanted to make sure that there were certain things that I was not going to repeat, and certain things that I was sure that I wanted to repeat from how I grew up, from what my own mother did, etc. I actually, it's a very interesting way that you asked the first question, because I wrote a blog for Mother's Day this year, that was about how does one deal with the ambivalence that one has towards one's own mother. What is ambivalent feelings? How do we work them through, etc. And I have to say, it's probably one of the most engaged posts we ever did. I mean, people just poured out with the fact that there was also the permission to not,
Yeah.
especially on a Mother's Day when you're supposed to just, hail the glories of your mother, that you actually say, no, it's a complex edifice. It's layers of different things about the relationship. So I thought my husband was the natural parent. He had patience. You would put a baby in his hands, and the babies instantly calmed down. He had that magic touch, and I was not. It turned out that I had more patience than we thought, and that he had sometimes less patience than he thought. So that was also a revelation for me. And I would say, lastly, the gender of my children, which turned out to be cisgendered heterosexual boys. At first, I thought, I understand girls. I know girls because I am one, and I that wasn't the case at all. It actually suited me perfectly to raise a creature about which I knew very little. I thought I knew very little, and it actually um, really changed my thinking about what is gender, what is personality, what is temperament, what is the dynamic of a relationship and the fit between a parent and a particular kid versus another kid. You have four, so you must be playing that chess game all day
Totally.
long.
Totally. Totally. Um, there's so much there. I mean, one of the things I think I've seen in your work, you brought up the role of the mother in our culture, right? And how deep and complicated. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of ground us in from a therapist's perspective. How does our mother shape us in this foundational way as a child? And how do you see adult mothers coming into that and wrestling with what they went through and who they want to be?
So modern psychology has put a big focus on the mother. And in the past, it put the focus on blaming the mother.
Mm-hmm.
If there were problems, it was because of the mother. And if there were no problems, it was thanks to the child, the parent, the environment. I mean, so there's a reification here taking place that I have challenged all along.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important books I read in my early 20s was called Motherhood by Elisabeth Badinter, a French feminist writer. And it was a book that basically debunked for the first time, it's a book of the early 80s, that motherhood was not an instinct, that motherhood is an identity, a relationship, a task that women learn, take on. This notion that it just lives inside of you, waiting to burst out, that is actually historically not even the case. So, what I have dealt with a lot is what are the cultural norms, the zeitgeist of how we think about mothers these days, and what of that serves us, and what of that may not serve us nearly as much.
Mm-hmm.
It really creates, you know, I always say I don't think my mother and her generation, and certainly my grandmother, who I never knew, but I don't think any of these women spend much time wondering if they were good mothers. They just mothered, they were mothers. And they were not parenting, it was parenthood. It's an identity, it's not something that you perfect. And furthermore, they lived in communities, so the mother had one role and there were many other adults around who all had a role in the raising of the child. I think
Mm-hmm.
that the nuclear family, mother, father, or two mothers, two fathers, you know at the center of which lays one, sometimes one child, has created a dynamic of reversed hierarchies, completely reversed hierarchies. It's every, children used to be assets, they have become economic drains. They
Mm-hmm.
are 24/7. You want to provide for them, your schedule is organized around them. I mean, something has really shifted, and to the point where parents, I'm a trained family therapist, so that is probably an important piece to say, is I have studied family systems, intergenerational families, extended families, all the configurations of modern families, and I've watched the families that come into my office on the backdrop of what the culture is telling them about motherhood, about parenting, about family life today. And I think it's a challenging time in the
I
West.
uh, exactly. And so I listened to Mating in Captivity, your best-selling book. I listened to it in
Mm-hmm.
England on my 10-year anniversary with my husband. We had already had 3 kids at that time. And we're really at a time of reflecting on our marriage and how parenthood has changed us. And this concept, this revelation, which you brought forward, others have too, but this idea that in the West and in the US in particular, we put an enormous emphasis on the nuclear family. We put an enormous emphasis on, your life partner to be your soulmate. And your work for me helped put that concept into a much broader global context throughout all different cultures and throughout time, and helped me realize that I didn't realize I was living in this system that put so much pressure on my husband, put so much pressure on me and that nuclear family.
What did you
And
change? What did you change? What did you do differently,
I got more
if you did?
help and I
Mm-hmm.
stopped
Yep.
feeling guilty. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it was actually you. It was actually you, not in the book, but something else you wrote after you blew my mind in the book. You wrote about getting help not to take care of the children, but to get help to help the parents. And
Right.
we got more housekeeping help. We got more services. For example, like I get a frozen I get a frozen vegetable box delivered that's like easy to heat up, and it's kind of expensive, but it takes a lot of pressure off of me. And so I realized through, I think it was an article you had written about it, or it was written about you. I have a right to thrive in motherhood, and it's not just about serving the
Right.
children. And if
Right.
the culture around us isn't going to do this for me because I live in America in 2021, then I've got to start to do it for myself. And I'm motivated to do it because I want my children to have to struggle less with the conflict that I felt. So thank you for that. That is
Did you
certainly how
bring
I
in
changed.
community too? Did you bring in friends, neighbors?
So thank you. I don't usually get asked all the questions, but I'm not surprised that's happening now. So I will say this. I have not yet, in part because we moved again during the pandemic. And then after I listened to this book, I got pregnant and had another baby. So my life has somewhat been on hold for 2 years. But I will tell you, I want to bring in the community. I have a deeper conviction that that is what it takes for families to thrive. I moved to a new place 9 months ago. I don't know anyone here yet, but I want to prioritize that in a way that I did not before. But is that the kind of advice that you would give to other mothers who are feeling
Yes.
the burden being so heavy and so much pressure on them alone? What do
So
you suggest?
I'll tell you, because I'm surrounded by four friends who are having children now. So I live in an intergenerational setting, which in itself, I think, and it's not familial. I don't have family here, so it's really a family of choice. It's a community of friends. I am delighted to be the one whose kids are grown up and who is, part of people who are having babies now.
Mm-hmm.
It's great for me, it's great for them. I remember for a few years, my husband and I led a series of workshops when two become three, transition to parenthood. And now, first thing we did is we did those workshops in the evening so that all parents could attend
Mm-hmm.
and not just the frontline parent who was primarily at home at that moment. And what I remember saying was, whatever help you're going to get is help for you, so that you can then be there with the children to do the things that you want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
it was not something I thought about a lot. It was obvious. But that became the thing that most people said was the most helpful advice that I had given for those who can afford private
Exactly.
childcare. For the others, and even for those, I kept saying, you cannot do this alone. When you say no to your kid, and if there are three other adults who say the same no, or who say the same yes, or who say the same, how about we do it this way, you get an echo chamber of support rather than just being you versus the kid, and then the kid says, but other people don't say so, and you have no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Isolation, and I remember being told about isolation, that it is and how much it was more challenging in the suburbs. I mean, I thought it's bad enough in the city, then I realized, and then I got really committed. I'm going to say what I know, because I don't come from here, so I have a certain observation. I do come from a social welfare system, so that's a very, very different reality.
Yeah.
Maternity leave in Belgium is not a disability leave. What does that say? Why is everybody rushing to get back to work to prove that they can do it, etc., etc.? So I took it on from the beginning. What does it mean when marriage becomes a social welfare state of two people that have to do? It's not just the emotional dimension; it's everything else as well.
Mm.
Bring in other people, and other people will give to you too. So I began to do that. If I had to go
Mm-hmm.
to a conference, my kids went to stay at friends. They started sleepovers very, very early, and vice versa. And they loved it. And of course, it depends on your kid and the situation, but it really became a notion of interdependence rather than self reliance. You don't call your friends when you can't find the paid version. And if you have tried every paid version and you can't
Mm.
reach them anymore, then you call a friend and you start by saying, I'm so sorry to impose on you. You first call all the friends. And if you can't tap anybody in your own community, then you look for the paid version. It's the reverse. And those ideas to me were obvious, and those ideas are what often people tell me that changed it for me. And
And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's particularly relevant because of what we've all gone through the last year and a half.
absolutely.
And I think in some ways, I think it has radicalized mothers to recognize we cannot live without these villages. We were forced to in isolation, but we have a newfound conviction and maybe permission to build this village back in a more deliberate way. What have you seen? I think especially about what parents have gone through and what the pandemic has revealed about our interdependence.
The parents who were able to create, it all depends also on the age of the children. There are different situations if you need to school them or if they are, preschoolers. But those who created pods were much better off. First of all, the relationships were less stressed. People rely on grandparents, on brothers, sisters, nannies. There's a system in place often, especially for people who have to leave home to work or who have to work from home but need to focus. So pods more than villages in the last year. Villages were too dangerous, but pods were really safe, and pods allowed people to share the vicissitudes of all of this, the stresses, the fears. Children could have contact with other children when you had a pod, rather than playing alone or via a screen and all of that. And it was, not everybody could, but everybody who understood the notion of the pod began to really, it was everything. It was, what happened to mothers in this year? You sat in a chair, like I'm sitting in this chair, like you probably are sitting in yours. And in this chair, I could be within the span of a day, I was a mother, a supervisor, a therapist, a company CEO, a podcaster, a speaker, all of this, without changing seats, without changing clothes, without going anywhere. All my roles were collapsing in one place. It was one big blend. And that created, in and of itself, exhaustion. And this is me without children to take care of, that come into the room, that ask you things, that need, So my co-producer on the podcast has 3 daughters, and I watched how she had to, straddle this whole thing. And the first thing we did, it's just tiny thing, but it was so important. Even on my team, they sit on the screen with the babies in their hands. Stop apologizing. Do not apologize because you have your child on your lap, because your child is cranky, or because you need to interrupt for a moment. This is the new reality. This is not the working mother leaves her house to go and be
That's
a
right.
working person and you don't know what happens back there. This is realities collapse together, and I am in your bedroom basically. I mean, we've never been physically more apart, but intimately more connected. You're in my bedroom, I'm in your bedroom, so here is what's going on. You relate?
I relate so much. I'm trying to decide where to take that. I when you brought up the blending of identities, perhaps it reminded me of a topic that I want to talk a lot about, which is motherhood and the erotic. Um, First of all, you have helped to popularize the word erotic outside of pornography settings, at least in my life. So
Yep.
I'm hoping to ground that part. Could you help define the erotic as you use that term?
Yes, beautiful. I use the mystical definition of the word erotic, a quality of aliveness, of vibrancy, of vitality, a life force, an energy. That, where pleasure exists, that is the erotic. Modernity has narrowed the meaning of the erotic to the sexual meaning, which is only one of them. But people can have sex for years and feel nothing. So the point is not the doing. The point is the poetics around the doing, the meaning that we ascribe to it, the generative feeling of pleasure that comes with it. So in Mating in Captivity, there is a chapter called When Three Threatens Two, which is really looking at how the transition to parenthood often saps this erotic dimension. And the way it plays out is this. It started because somebody once said to me, sex with kids, you must be kidding. And I said, let's not talk about sex. Let's talk about the erotic. Imagination. With your kids, you're constantly looking for new things to do. Curiosity. Oh my, you know, curiosity comes with raising children. Novelty, they get new activities, new clothes. You know, you do, you know, your once a year, you know, anniversary. The erotic is alive and well, that
Mm-hmm.
energy, but it is transposed onto the kids, often leaving the couple gasping. How do you bring that erotic energy back to the relationship? On the long list of what kids need, parents who have that connection is essential. Why? Because this is the first time in the history of humankind that the survival of the family depends so much, at least in our
Mm.
countries, on the happiness of the couple. If the couple breaks down, you may have given everything to your kids, but you won't give them a stable family. The family won't last. And that toppled, you know, the erotic is important to keep in the relationship. The relationship cannot become a functional unit of to-dos and functions and did you do this and did you do that and how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Johnny did eat ate very well today. You know, no, that it doesn't tell me how you are.
Mm.
And how to stay connected with the partner, how to stay engaged, how to understand that there is one frontline parent that thinks about the needs of the children and one second line parent that thinks about the need of the couple, and that that
Mm-hmm.
kind of role distribution is essential. That when one
Mm.
person says sit down, let's chill for a moment, and the other one says how can you think about this now, take it as they do you a favor. They help you remember that the couple needs to be fed and not just the little smurfs, because if the couple doesn't get fed emotionally, erotically, energetically, that doesn't have anything to do with how often they're sexual with each other,
Mm-hmm.
but how they connect with each other. It really takes away ultimately from the children.
Mm-hmm. And it's that motivation is certainly present for me to be that role model example in my marriage, especially when it's so easy with four kids to get directed towards them. I guess I'm also wondering
It's also good
specifically.
if you say to your kids, we are going out, mom and dad. We have our play
Yep.
date this week. And the kids learn there's a ritual. They have their play dates, the parents have their play date too. There is that time. It's like
Yeah.
I never forget this patient of mine who said, when I would hear my parents play Marvin Gaye, I knew not to knock
Mm.
at the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was
Exactly.
just like,
Exactly. And yet, you know, again, in America in 2021, the idea of motherhood, the motherhood identity and the erotic is, I feel like, incredibly taboo. Even though our sexuality is how we often become mothers, there is this taboo in seeing mothers as sexual, and I think even with the physical changes we go through as mothers, we see ourselves often as less sexual somehow. How do you think this almost negative connotation of motherhood impacts the erotic and sexual identity that we have as women, and is there a way to reframe that story?
I love your question. Look, historically, we have, this is not recent, right? Motherhood has been associated with chastity, with
Mm.
selflessness, with sacrifice. Um, it is fantastic. If you de eroticize the mother, you don't have to see her as threatening to the stability of the family. Only men have been given the privilege of being allowed to threaten the stability of families. And then you can make this whole, add a biological and, and an evolutionary argument to it to kind of prove that that's the case.
Hmm.
And modernity and modern mothers for sure have proven that that's not so much the case. So the history of how a woman, you know, if you want, look, I'm going to say it very bluntly, but it's this: if women, it's not women, if a society continues to hone in on the notion of the sacrificial, chaste, selfless mother, then it needs to accept a system of other women that take care of the other side of the equation,
Hmm.
as often is the case in different cultural systems. You know, that is the system that we had. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if the mother becomes just that sacrificial person, then there is another woman out there that is there
Mm.
to represent pleasure, the erotic, lightness, non-responsibility, etc. And then we split those two characters and we
Mhm.
make them irreconcilable inside ourselves and inside the cultural system. What we have wanted, what feminism has tried to help us do as well, is a reconciliation of these parts so that you don't have to choose. You are either a mother or a professional. You are either a virtuous woman or a slut, to use
Mhm.
the name. It's like, how do we create an identity that is integrated and consolidated and then allows women to choose what parts of they want to express and at what point in time? We know we live twice as long as well. So to women, I say, you know, it's a beautiful question. It's a question that I took from a colleague of mine, Gina Ogden, who passed away, and she would ask this: I turn myself off when, or I turn myself off by,
Mm.
which is not the same as you turn me off when, or what turns me off is. And
Mm.
turning off in the broad sense. And what people, of course, would say is, I turn off, I shut down, I extinguish my desire, I flatten myself, I numb, in the erotic sense of the word, right? When I'm anxious, when I worry about money, when I worry about my kids, when we don't talk, when I don't take care of myself, when basically there's very little sexual stuff in there. It's really when I don't feel alive, I
Mm.
cannot connect to my erotic self. That part of myself that is not just about security, stability, and predictability, but the part of me that reaches out, that explores, that grows, that discovers, that is curious, etc. I
Mhm.
turn myself on or I awaken myself in the broad sense of the word. There were answers, and that's not what turns me on and you turn me on when. And women would talk about when I go into nature, when I sing, when I play music, when I see friends, when I take care of myself, when I get a massage. Basically, when I feel worthy to pay attention to myself, to nurture myself, and to feel that I don't come at the end of it all,
Mhm.
but I come as part of it all so that I can be there for others. And I'm not just defined by caretaking and responsibility and duty and burden. And it's that exercise that then begins to say, then you say, well, when is the last time when you sang? Or when you walked on wet grass, or when you went alone to the beach with your dog, or, you know, you have got to go do this because otherwise you will react differently to your children. You may be more depressed, you may be more deflated, you may be disconnected from yourself and then disconnected from your partner. Do it, and do it because it is part of your role and your identity, not do it because you are defying the rules. And then we work on the guilt and etc etc. There's a
Mm.
tremendous amount of pressure these days. I mean, it's really pressure and judgment.
And I think you gave so many examples of little but really meaningful things we all need to give ourselves permission to do, and also I think you acknowledged it, it is radical to say, for example, I was reading that when your kids were growing up, you didn't go to their Saturday morning sports games most of the time because you were doing things that brought you pleasure. And that's for me, like my kids are playing football. I was at football last night. I'm at football all the time. I'm making time for my kids to go to football 5 days a week, but I'm not making time for myself to do things that, you know, bring me that sense of aliveness. And it feels radical. It feels selfish to do those things, and it's not, but it feels that way because we have all been indoctrinated in a
Yes.
culture of motherhood as martyrdom, and there's a
And I
healthier
have
way.
asked, yeah, it's so interesting that you read this thing. I asked my kids, how was that for you? I check in with them so that
Mm-hmm.
you know what is important to know is, at that time, I do remember saying to some of my friends, this is weird. Here we are spending the entire day at the sidelines of these games, cheering up the one time that they've touched the ball,
Mm-hmm.
and why doesn't everybody have their activities on Saturday morning and I'll come on the important games? I don't have to be here for hours. Okay, then we made it into a US versus foreign, but it's true that I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt
Yeah.
that this doesn't work well for me, and that if I come back after 2 hours and you had a great game and I had a great whatever I was doing, and we chat about it together, and then we spend the afternoon, we have a good time. Now, I did take my kids every year, each son alone for a week,
Mm.
just them and I. And that became a real tradition. It's like I did other things that they remember as really foundational in creating a deep connection between us. But I am a cross cultural therapist, and it was important for me to not just take in practices because that's what other people do
Mm-hmm.
and then just do it. And I watch the parents around. Now sometimes it becomes a great place to be where you meet other parents, where you
Right.
leave finally your house, where you make lifelong friendships. That is there too. And sometimes it's like, which is the parent that is always there and the one who is allowed to go and be at the gym or go and do a bike ride or something else. And then there is simply, this notion that you're going to pity the kid whose parents are not there
Mm-hmm.
because they should rather than and I think that this is part of the reversed hierarchy, and
Exactly. That's what I
that's
was
it.
going to, it reminds me of, I can only imagine 100 years ago or 200 or 1,000, on the farm, that parents were not spending their Saturdays, entertaining their children. That it was in a way, and I wasn't there, but I've read, that the adults in the community were living their lives and the children were a natural part of that, rather than the adults kind of live and work to entertain and make our kids happy in some sense. That but it takes being aware at the very least that our culture is this way, because if you don't even realize there's another way to be, you can't choose something else. But so many mothers feel broken and burned out and like they are not getting nourished. So I think it's, in those examples you provide, it's an opportunity to reflect on, is it really serving the kids as well? Ultimately, it's not healthy. For we know it's not healthy. And if mothers aren't healthy, it's not going to be helping the child in the long run as well.
Why do you think this has just gone and accelerated? Is what I'm there was a
Yeah.
moment when I thought things are turning a little bit, and
Well,
mothers are spending more times with their kids than ever. So do fathers for that matter in our
mhm.
country. There is more dedication of resources, financial resources, time resources. 3 meals made because we asked kids, "What do you want to eat?" At
Mhm. Mhm.
rather than this is the pot for that I just cooked, and the mothers are depleted. They're lonely. They're depressed, etc. And it doesn't change. And this is
Mhm.
by people who have a voice. Not talking about those who don't have a
Mhm.
voice.
Mhm. I mean, there's all different arguments, and I'm not an expert. I observe them, I read them. I mean, there's
Yeah.
economic arguments as to why mothers feel obligated to invest time in their children. Families are smaller, so there's more of a sense of
Yeah.
wanting to make a lot of investments into fewer children. Women have so many choices now, which is a good thing, but then we feel like we have to do everything. Our culture doesn't honor motherhood. We don't get protected time to recover, to adjust. I don't know. Those are some of the things that I've read, but I do think there is a subculture and there is a growing movement, that is recognizing that, okay, we know in some ways motherhood is broken in America and we need to learn other ways of being. And I do see in some ways the pandemic, I've used the word radicalized, but I think it's true. I think there are many mothers who recognize we need dramatic change, policy change, culture change, remote work, flexible work change, all of that. So I hope that this conversation is a bit of permission, for mothers to explore other ways of being
I
through parenthood.
think I think that I hear you, and let alone how many mothers live not in families with two parents. They are the primary parent and the only
Mm-hmm.
parent. Um, I, there is such a notion of having to do it on your own, and
Yeah.
that if you need others, you're not doing it well. It's an organizational problem if you can't get it all
Yeah.
done. You should get some skills. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's the questioning of the system, you know, how absolutely the structures of policy, that for sure. I mean, this is unimaginable that one of the most important industrialized country does not have a system in place for maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave, and not of 6 weeks. If
Mm-hmm.
it's just
Mm-hmm.
it puts so much pressure on the people.
That's right.
It puts so much pressure on the people. This is what I kept saying. I said it can be different. I know it. I go
Yes.
abroad, I see it, either it is a traditional structure with an extended network, either it is a European structure with a social welfare structure, but somebody's there to help. And here, I felt sometimes so alone, like I couldn't bear it.
But I actually hadn't thought of it this way, but the way that you brought forward the pod, the necessary pod that many families created, I think it is a good analogy for surviving in this, world that is unfriendly to parenthood. And I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. How can I build that community, and maybe it's just two or three other families, but we really rely on one another and we really enmesh our lives. Maybe you could cook dinner on Monday nights and we all eat there. That is the kind of world that I
That's
want
right.
to live in
That's right.
going
And
forward.
it takes people like you to speak about it on your podcast and then to do it.
Hmm.
Once you do it, you realize it's people begin to be curious about it because it's unusual, but it
Right.
makes so much sense. It makes, what we did during the pandemic is we were a number of families and we cooked and we basically were so tired. If I had to eat one more time the same food that I make,
Hmm.
so we
Yes.
began to rotate. We had leftovers. Everybody would drop leftovers outside the door without even going in to
Mm.
other people, so that you know we could support each other in that way. And what you just described, three families, that's not just carpooling.
Right.
Carpooling is the one place where people here are willing, because a culture of cars. So more than that, yes,
Hmm.
food, homework. If one parent is going to sit with one child to do homework, why don't you have three kids do the
That's
homework
right.
together? They'll do
That's
it
right.
much more as well. They'll be
That's
motivated
right.
by each other you know
And I've also read, considerable research about how children are benefited by having additional allo parents, other role models, other safe places, other examples in their lives. It's not just parents that feel the pressure; it's kids, and maybe that's adding to the somewhat fraught relationship and pressure
I
around the
love the
parenting
word
culture.
allo parent. I would say more even. It's not just other families and other parents, but it's also families and parents who live differently, who are not just carbon copies of the model that they have at home. Different rules, different amount of kids. Here the grandparent lives with the family. Here it's just one parent. Here it's
Mm.
a polyamorous family. Here it's, I think that it's very, very important for children to absorb from early on that there are various ways, but there are
Yes.
always ways, but they can be different.
Mm. Hmm.
And one of the nicest things, I had my birthday last week. One of my kids said when he spoke, and we had, about a whole group of close friends that are. He says, "I consider you're not just my mother's friend. I consider you all people of my life too. I've gone to you for advice about college, and I've gone to you for advice about school, and I've gone to you for advice about, love stories. When I don't want to talk to my mom, etc." And I thought, wow, if I've done one thing right,
Mm.
this one worked. I really, they had no grandparents, they had a very small family, and I just thought, okay, I'm going to bring in my friends to be their advisors, their elders. Which traditional cultures have elders. We don't in that formal way. So I love your allo parent concept.
Oh, and we're gonna have to have you on for another episode all about elders and the role of the wise woman. I have a lot. I'd love to talk about that as well. Your work has taken so many forms, from your decades as a therapist, best-selling author, popular speaker, podcast host, but now also creator of a new game, also called Where Do We Begin? It is an activity you can do with a partner, but also that you can do with friends and family. So tell our listeners more about this game, how it works, and why you wanted to create it.
Wonderful. My podcast is called Where Should We Begin? It is a series of live couples sessions, couples therapy sessions, that you can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. And in the Where Should We Begin podcast lies the notion that relationships are stories. And stories create relationships. Stories bind us. Stories are bridge for connection. And sometimes our stories get stuck, and then we need to change the ones that no longer serve us. But creating conversation is an essential part of my work, helping people have difficult conversations with each other. And so during the pandemic, I was working a lot on that. And at one point, I said, I do need to create something that also connects us to the erotic in that same way that we defined it before. You know, here we are, we can't explore the outside, so maybe we can explore the inside. Maybe we can actually become curious about these people that are living with us in a way that we are not anymore because we think we know them. And I said, I want curiosity, playfulness, I want the permission. I want to create a frame that allows us to tell the stories that we don't usually tell and to unlock the stories within. And so I said, let's create a game. So we created a card game, my team and I, called Where Should We Begin? A game of stories in which we tell each other stories and we invite stories from each other in a particular frame. And just this week, a father wrote to me that he was playing with his daughter. It's a family of two fathers and two children. And he said, and then he said, it was so good. We talked about stuff we never talk about. I said, what were some of the prompts that really spurred? He said, I'm most judgmental when it comes to, I owe an apology to, a lie I have told too many times, and an aspect of how I was raised that I wish I could change. And he said, we would never have this. And so play creates a frame, play gives permission, play is fun, and the stories are endless.
It's a really fun game. One of the things that I really appreciate that you did is that you put symbols on cards. In general, you put different symbols on the story cards, so that you can remove the ones about sexuality if you would rather not talk about that with your parents or your children. Or maybe if
Correct.
you do, go for it, but you can certainly remove those. It's also, there's a prompt card and a story card. And in a way, it's that dance, right? That you're always talking about, like how you reveal yourself in a relationship is through the context.
For
Here's one.
example.
So for
Yeah.
example, I just picked one. I don't know if you can read
just
it.
did. Hold on, let me see
Is
if
it
I can
backwards
make
or can you read it?
I'm going to make it bigger. Hold on a second. Read it for me.
Share
No, you
something.
were right. You had it right. But
Oh, I
just
did. Okay.
couldn't
It
read.
says
Yeah.
share something you've never told anyone. And then,
Right.
so that's the prompt, right? And then,
Mhm.
that doesn't, let's see here. And this one is my experience with death has been. So these two, this prompt informs your story.
Or you could have
So-
a story question that says, I would quit my job if you'd pay me too. Or my guilty pleasure is. Or I haven't told anyone how I feel about. Or I've never shared the whole story about the time that. And then you go that I've never told anyone. But if you had the same prompts, but instead of that I've never told anyone, it says that I wouldn't tell my mother. Or that from my teenage point of view. There's
It's a different
nothing kids
story.
love more than parents who talk about their own teenage point of view. How I was at 15, what I was struggling with, how I dealt with that friend that suddenly didn't want to go out with me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thing that parents don't spend enough time. They ask too many questions and they talk too little about themselves.
Mm.
And in fact, if they talked about themselves, then the kids get to ask questions. And then you begin to elicit the curiosity. So the game is played with people you've never met. It's played with your
Mm-hmm.
partner. It's played with good friends, and it's played with your children. And when you play with your children, whatever the age, you pretty much are better off making it, safe for all.
Um, I think one of the things that I actually really appreciate about the game is that it's provocative without being embarrassing. I bought a relationship card game and I felt like they were trying to get me to reveal my deepest, darkest secrets at every given moment. And I know reading your book that the mystery and the dance of what you share and when you share it is a part of the relationship when you're a parent, when you're married, when you're growing in relationship to your own parents. So I do appreciate that it's a way that it's an invitation perhaps to conversation, not a here's the most provocative thing I could say
No,
about a particular topic.
that's correct. I'm not digging into your basement.
Mhm.
Actually, you can choose completely the story you want to tell, but it
Exactly.
is fascinating how people suddenly, they think something, nothing comes, and then suddenly, their memory brings up a thing. Beautiful, beautiful stories. I had one recently. I still remember the time I was rejected, and a time that I was rejected. And I started talking about something that happened to me when I was 13 years old.
Mm.
And one of my kids was playing with us, and we were a group of friends. And it was really fascinating to watch, you rejected, how can, I said, yes, yes, by my dearest friend, who is still my dearest friend.
Oh wow.
And then we talked about how the research, says that friends who are able to resolve conflicts, it's the studies of Joseph Wall. Actually are better off later in their romantic relationships, and so it started this whole
Mm.
other conversation. Um, Play is often under, especially if we talk mother now. I think I want to say that
Yes.
we play with little children. We don't play with them later, and
Mhm.
we don't play because we think play is for little people, when play is actually a permission giving frame, that allows us to be curious and exploratory, etc., at any
Mm.
age.
Mhm.
And if I have an invitation for mothers,
Mhm.
because there is this notion always that the mother doesn't play, the mother cooks, feeds, washes, da, 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 and then if there is another parent, another mother or another
Mhm.
father for that matter, or an uncle or a grandparent, they will be the one to build the castle on the beach.
Mhm.
The mother doesn't play. And I would really like to play has so many healing qualities to it, and that any game, card games later,
Mhm.
but play with your children, play even as they grow older.
Mm.
It's undervalued, period,
And
because we think
and
it's
it feel
just the little ones.
and it feels like I mean I know I undervalue it, or I tell myself I don't have time for that, or
That's right.
whatever, but you're absolutely right that it is in some ways the antidote to burnout. Saying that I have time to play is saying I don't have to be the martyr. And that's a big step for someone like me, and I'm sure many other mothers. Is there
How old
anything
is your
else?
oldest, Liz?
My oldest is 9 and my
Mhm.
youngest is 2. Um, and
Have
my
they made
older
breakfast for you already?
Yes, yes. My older children, I think when you grow up in a larger family, you have to be more independent. So I definitely cultivate that. Um, but I've worked full time up until 3 months ago as a mom, and there's been very little space in my life for play, for fun, for friends. Then we had a pandemic. So, as I said, I mean, it's for me, it's very important to make space for these things and also to question. I was telling my therapist this week, in fact, if I have an instinct right now that says, no, I can't do that, I'm trying to intentionally tell myself yes, because often I'm telling myself no to things that are actually good for me. But it's just that I have an instinct to choose, you know, work, an instinct to choose cleaning or whatever those things are. So it's something I'm certainly working on, and I'm sure other mothers are as well. Is there anything else? I want to respect our time here. Is there anything else you want mothers who are listening to know?
There's so many different things I could address, but I think especially at this moment, this is a time of mass mutual reliance. This is a time where you don't shy away from asking for help and offering, rather than being afraid that you're going to be intrusive. There is a shyness around saying, can I do this for you? And you see people melt when someone just notices. It's like when you're struggling with carrying bags and somebody says, let me take this for you. And you just feel like, oh, somebody saw me. Somebody noticed that this is, rather than I can do it. It's okay, we know you can do it. We trust your competence, but it really melts us when we feel that, I don't have to just forge ahead with this. Ask more from your kids. Ask more from your kids. That too is protective. Not just, they should go play, and I call them when when the food is ready.
Mm.
Put them to work. you
Yeah.
know People who don't have a choice know that very well. It's the people who have a choice to whom I'm saying this. you know Let the kids take care of you a little bit. You don't have to parentify them, but let them know that you too have needs. You too are sometimes tired. you know and speak to them about that. If we want them to be empathic creatures, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
teach them the empathy towards us.
Mm-hmm.
And we are right there. If you're sad, you tell them I'm sad. You don't try to, hide the whole thing. If you're joyous, you tell them I'm joyous. If you're worried that day, you tell them I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I don't know. Do you ever have a knot in your stomach? Oof, let's do something to get our knots, a little softer. Shall we rub our little tummies together so that it's not just they have a knot in the stomach and you never have any of these issues? I think this is where parenting and parenthood has taken on a very different identity. We know that children are talking more to parents than ever before in our
Mm.
quarters. Ever, ever, ever. Parents are involved in the life of children like the boomer generation never was. We told nothing to our parents. But the reverse has to happen now too, where parents sometimes talk to their kids about just who they are as human beings. I'm not talking about bringing them into the conflicts with your partner if you have a current partner. I'm talking just you too have those same issues. They were rejected, you've been rejected. That notion of the parent being a person much
Mm.
sooner is the next step to the children having brought in the parents at a level that we
Mm.
never did before. I think that's one of the actually beautiful developments that is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
As
Mm-hmm.
we talk about the negative ones, there are some very beautiful ones too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers or helps us discover parts of ourselves that we didn't know were there before we became parents. So I am wondering, what is your superpower?
My superpower that I discovered through motherhood.
Perhaps. But if it's
Ah,
not through motherhood, that's okay too.
I would say that my superpower is that I am able to listen and then to reflect back a very different story, a very different perspective. I can reframe.
Mm-hmm.
I have a way of putting parts of reality together that often is very different from how somebody initially brings it to me. It could be my kids coming to talk to me, or my team, or my patients. I love to take a story and to reframe the whole story, to bring a whole different perspective to it, to take people out of a state of stuckness,
Mm.
to bring hope, to bring a different view, and to bring a different possibility. I think that that's probably my superpower as a friend and as a therapist,
Mm.
and everything else I do.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for all the wisdom that you shared and brought to the podcast. And thank you for joining us today on
It's
the
my
Motherly
pleasure.
podcast.
I'll be
Thank
back.
you.
Bye
I
bye.
would love that. I would love that.